What if I told you that according to recent studies, over 40% of Americans report feeling more isolated from their families after age 60 than they did in their younger years? And that the most painful realization of aging isn't your body breaking down or watching the world change around you, but discovering that the people you trusted most might not be the sanctuary you always believed they'd be? I know that sounds harsh, maybe even shocking, but stick with me here because what I'm about to share with you could completely transform how you navigate your relationships after 60. Here's the uncomfortable truth nobody wants to discuss. After decades of being the reliable one, the problem solver, the emotional backbone of your family, you might find yourself facing a devastating reality. The very people who benefited most from your endless giving are nowhere to be found when you need them most. And if you're experiencing this right now, I want you to know something crucial. You're not alone, and more importantly, you're not crazy for feeling betrayed and disappointed. But here's where this gets interesting, and why I need you to watch until the very end of this video. Carl Jung, one of the greatest psychological minds in history, predicted this exact scenario. He understood something profound about human relationships that most of us learn the hard way. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to stop expecting emotional nourishment from sources that simply can't provide it. And what I'm going to reveal to you today isn't just about surviving family disappointment. It's about using that disappointment as a doorway to something far more valuable: genuine freedom and self-reliance. If this resonates with you, please hit that like button right now. It tells me you're ready for some hard truths about family dynamics that nobody else is willing to discuss. And make sure you subscribe and ring that notification bell, because we're diving deep into topics that could fundamentally change how you see your relationships and, more importantly, how you value yourself. Now, I'm going to walk you through 8 powerful insights that will help you understand why family disappointment after 60 isn't a personal failure. It's often a necessary wake-up call. And by the end of this video, I'll share Jung's most radical insight about what he called the final individuation, a psychological transformation that happens after 60 that can turn your deepest disappointments into your greatest liberation. Trust me, this revelation about aging and authentic selfhood will completely reframe how you think about your worth and your future. So settle in, because we're about to challenge everything you've been taught about family loyalty, and I promise you, the psychological breakthrough waiting for you will be worth every uncomfortable moment of truth we explore together. You know, there's this beautiful lie we tell ourselves from the moment we're born, that family is everything. We grow up believing our blood relatives will always have our backs, that they'll be there through thick and thin, unconditionally supporting us no matter what. It's deeply woven into the American dream, isn't it? This Norman Rockwell painting of multi-generational gatherings, where grandparents are cherished and wisdom is celebrated around the dinner table. This belief becomes so deeply embedded in our psyche that we rarely question it, even when evidence suggests otherwise. But here's the thing about family dynamics. They're often built on obligation rather than genuine affection. Think about it. Would you choose to spend time with some of your relatives if you met them at a coffee shop in downtown Chicago or a book club in suburban Phoenix? Probably not. Yet we convince ourselves that blood makes all the difference, that genetic connection somehow guarantees emotional support and understanding. We ignore red flags, excuse toxic behavior, and rationalize dysfunction because, well, they're family. This emotional dependence becomes our Achilles heel as we age. The truth is, this whole family-first mentality can become a prison disguised as love. You might find yourself constantly trying to prove your worth to people who never truly see you, like the daughter who spent decades trying to earn her critical mother's approval, or the son who sacrificed his dreams to meet his father's expectations. Maybe you're the one who always hosts Thanksgiving, mediates sibling disputes, or provides financial support during everyone else's crises. Carl Jung understood this deeply. He recognized that true personal growth often requires us to step away from inherited expectations and forge our own path. What's particularly cruel about this illusion is how it intensifies as we approach our later years. When you're young, you have colleagues who respect your expertise, friends who appreciate your humor, and maybe a spouse who truly sees your worth. But as life progresses, and these connections naturally shift, careers end, friends move away, marriages evolve, we often find ourselves leaning more heavily on family ties. That's when the harsh reality hits like a cold Chicago winter, and it cuts deeper than any physical pain you've ever experienced. But here's what Jung discovered about this painful awakening. The moment of awakening usually doesn't announce itself like a 4th of July fireworks display. It creeps up on you like those subtle changes in a Midwestern autumn. Maybe it's your retirement party, and you realize your adult children showed up out of duty, not celebration. Perhaps you're dealing with a health scare, desperately needing someone to drive you to appointments and provide emotional support, but instead you get obligatory check-ins that feel more like items being crossed off a to-do list. Or it could be something as simple as sharing exciting news about a new hobby or achievement, only to be met with polite disinterest or subtle criticism. What makes this awakening so particularly devastating is the contrast between the family mythology you've carried and the stark reality staring you in the face. You've spent decades being the reliable one, showing up for soccer games, graduations, and weddings, offering financial help during their tough times, celebrating their victories as if they were your own. You were the family's emotional Switzerland, always neutral, always helpful. For women especially, this role often meant being the family therapist, the holiday coordinator, the one who remembered everyone's birthdays and kept relationships intact. Naturally, you expected some reciprocity when your turn came. The psychological impact of this revelation can't be understated. It's not just disappointment. It's a complete recalibration of your understanding of human relationships, like discovering that the GPS you've been following for decades has been leading you in circles. You start questioning everything. Was their love conditional all along? Were you just useful rather than genuinely valued? The answer often stings because it forces you to confront some uncomfortable truths about family dynamics and the American cultural myth that blood automatically equals unconditional support. This awakening, though brutal as a Minnesota winter, serves a crucial purpose in our psychological maturity. It strips away the comfortable illusions and forces us to see relationships for what they truly are, not what we desperately want them to be. Sure, it hurts like hell initially, but there's something profoundly liberating about finally understanding the rules of the game you've been playing your entire life. Once you stop expecting emotional nourishment from sources that simply can't provide it, you're free to seek it elsewhere, or better yet, cultivate it within yourself. And that's where Jung's concept of individuation becomes not just theory, but survival strategy. Carl Jung had this brilliant insight that most people spend the first half of their lives building an ego, climbing the ladder, accumulating achievements, fitting into social expectations, and the second half discovering who they really are beneath all those layers of performance. He called this process individuation, and here's what's fascinating. Jung observed this pattern across cultures, from Swiss bankers to American farmers, from European artists to Midwestern teachers. But here's what Jung understood that many miss. This process often requires us to disappoint the very people who claim to love us most. Think about how this plays out in American family dynamics. Maybe you've always been the successful one, the person everyone brags about at family barbecues, the lawyer, the teacher, the nurse who always has their life together. Your identity within the family system is built around being dependable, predictable, and selfless. But what happens when you start prioritizing your own needs after 60? When you decide to move to that artist's community in Santa Fe, or choose to spend your savings on travel instead of leaving it all as inheritance? Suddenly, you're labeled as going through a phase or being selfish. Jung recognized that true psychological maturity requires us to integrate both our light and shadow aspects, including the uncomfortable truth that we don't owe our lives to anyone, even family. This doesn't mean becoming callous or abandoning everyone, but it does mean recognizing that your primary responsibility is to your own psychological wholeness. When you stop performing the role your family assigned you and start living authentically, Some relationships will naturally fall away. For many women, this means stepping away from the caretaker role. For men, it might mean admitting vulnerability or pursuing interests deemed impractical. The beautiful irony is that the people who truly love you will support your individuation journey, even when it makes them uncomfortable. They'll recognize that your personal growth enhances your ability to connect authentically, rather than just playing prescribed roles. But those who resist your evolution, who prefer you small and predictable, reveal something important about the nature of your relationship. Jung would say these people are invested in your persona, the mask you wear, rather than your true self. And that's a crucial distinction that becomes crystal clear as you age. But recognizing this difference is just the beginning. Next, you need to understand the sophisticated games that keep you trapped. Family systems operate on unspoken rules and invisible power structures that would make a Washington, D.C. political machine look straightforward by comparison. Over decades, these dynamics become so entrenched that nobody questions them anymore. They're just how we've always done things. You might find yourself playing the same role you've held since childhood. The responsible oldest daughter who manages everyone's problems. The successful son who's expected to bail everyone out financially, or the family peacekeeper who sacrifices their own needs to maintain harmony at every holiday gathering. Let's talk about guilt, the family weapon of choice, sharper than any Swiss Army knife and twice as versatile. After everything we've done for you becomes the guilt trip that keeps you compliant and self-sacrificing. Or there's the classic American family favorite, blood is thicker than water, which really translates to, your needs come last, always. Women especially know the guilt game well. The subtle sighs when you can't babysit grandchildren, the passive-aggressive comments about how other daughters call more often, the martyred expressions when you finally set a boundary. Then there's the manipulation through crisis, and boy, is this one sophisticated. Notice how family emergencies always seem to coincide with moments when you're finally focusing on yourself. You finally book that solo trip to Tuscany, and suddenly someone needs emergency financial help. You start dating after your divorce, and mysteriously, multiple family members develop conditions requiring your immediate attention. It's not coincidence, it's emotional dependency playing out in real time, as American as apple pie and twice as calculated. The most sophisticated family manipulation is the conditional love game, perfected over generations like a family recipe passed down through the years. Love and acceptance are offered based on your compliance with unspoken family rules rather than your inherent worth as a person. Step out of line and watch how quickly phone calls become less frequent, invitations dry up, and family group chats suddenly go silent when you post about your new interests or achievements. This isn't love, it's emotional hostage-taking with a smile. And recognizing this distinction becomes absolutely crucial as you navigate your later years with newfound wisdom about human relationships. But here's what Jung discovered about the antidote to these games. There's a profound difference between being alone and being lonely. Though our culture, obsessed with constant connection and social media validation, consistently conflates the two. After 60, you might discover that solitude isn't the enemy you thought it was, but rather your greatest ally in developing genuine self-reliance and inner peace. Think about the great American tradition of self-reliance, from Thoreau at Walden Pond to the pioneering spirit that built this country. Sometimes the most important journey you can take is the one inward. This necessary solitude serves as a laboratory for personal growth that no amount of family dinners or group chats can replace. Without the constant noise of others' expectations and demands, you finally hear your own voice clearly, maybe for the first time since you were young and dreaming of who you might become. You discover preferences you never knew you had. Maybe you actually love jazz instead of the classic rock your family always played, or perhaps you're drawn to gardening, painting, or learning Italian. It's like meeting yourself for the first time after decades of being who everyone else needed you to be. The fear of being alone often keeps us trapped in unsatisfying family dynamics long past their expiration date, like staying in a job you hate because the benefits are familiar. We convince ourselves that any connection is better than no connection, even if those relationships drain our energy faster than a smartphone battery on a road trip. For women especially, who are often raised to believe their worth comes from caring for others, the idea of prioritizing solitude can feel revolutionary and terrifying. But Jung understood something profound about this fear. Here's what nobody tells you about aging wisdom. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to step away from relationships that no longer serve your highest good, even if those relationships are with family. This isn't about holding grudges or burning bridges like some dramatic Lifetime movie. It's about recognizing that your emotional well-being is your responsibility, not theirs. When you embrace necessary solitude, you stop being a victim of other people's limitations and start becoming the architect of your own inner peace. And that's when the real construction work begins. Building genuine emotional independence after 60 isn't about becoming some kind of hermit in a cabin in Montana. It's about developing an unshakable inner core that doesn't depend on external validation or support, like having your own emotional 401k that nobody else can touch. Think of it like constructing a fortress, but instead of walls designed to keep others out, you're building inner strength that makes you genuinely self-sufficient. This process starts with brutal honesty about your emotional patterns and dependencies, followed by the deliberate cultivation of resources that come from within. The first foundation stone in this fortress is developing a rich inner life that nourishes you independently of social connections. This might mean diving deep into interests you've always postponed, maybe that photography class you've been considering since your kids left home, learning to paint like Georgia O'Keeffe, or finally reading all those books that have been gathering dust. For men, this often means giving themselves permission to explore interests that weren't considered practical during their career-building years. When you become genuinely interesting to yourself, you stop desperately seeking entertainment and validation from family members who might not even understand who you've become. Emotional self-reliance also means developing the skills to process your feelings without immediately turning to others for comfort or advice. It's like becoming your own therapist, coach, and best friend all rolled into one. This doesn't mean suppressing emotions like some stoic cowboy, quite the opposite. It means learning to sit with discomfort, to find meaning in your experiences without needing someone else to interpret them for you, and to celebrate your victories even when nobody else recognizes them. These are muscles that atrophy when we're constantly seeking external emotional support. Perhaps most importantly, building your own fortress means creating personal rituals and practices that anchor you during difficult times, like having your own personal constitution that guides your decisions. Maybe it's morning meditation with coffee watching the sunrise, evening journaling while listening to Miles Davis, long walks in Central Park, or deep conversations with carefully chosen friends who actually see and value who you are. These become your emotional infrastructure, reliable sources of peace and clarity that don't depend on anyone else's availability, mood, or approval. When you have this kind of inner stability, family disappointment stops feeling like the end of the world and starts feeling like useful information about relationship limitations. But here's where it gets really interesting. You can actually create something better. Here's a revolutionary thought that goes against everything we're taught about family loyalty. What if the most important relationships in your life aren't determined by genetics but by genuine compatibility, shared values, and mutual respect? As you age, you gain the wisdom to recognize that blood relation doesn't automatically create emotional connection, any more than living in the same neighborhood makes you best friends with every neighbor. More importantly, you develop the courage to actively choose who deserves access to your time, energy, and affection. Your chosen family might look completely different from what you imagined in your younger years. Maybe it's your neighbor Mrs. Johnson who checks on you because she genuinely cares, not because Hallmark cards tell her to. Perhaps it's the writing group you joined where people celebrate your creativity, or the hiking club where your sense of adventure is appreciated rather than criticized as impractical for someone your age. These relationships feel different because they're built on authentic appreciation rather than familial duty, like the difference between arranged marriage and choosing your own partner. What's particularly beautiful about these chosen relationships is their voluntary nature, refreshing as sweet tea on a summer day in Georgia. Nobody's there because they have to be, which means every moment of connection is genuine and freely given. These people celebrate your boundaries rather than resenting them, support your personal growth even when it makes them slightly uncomfortable, and offer practical help without keeping score or holding it over your head like some emotional accountant. The contrast with family dynamics becomes as stark as the difference between a genuine smile and a fake one for the camera. The process of building your chosen family requires discernment and courage, two qualities that thankfully tend to strengthen with age, like a good bourbon. You learn to recognize the difference between people who add value to your life and those who drain it faster than a leaky faucet, between relationships that nourish your soul and those that diminish it. This isn't about being judgmental, it's about being selective with your most precious resources, your time and emotional energy. When you're intentional about who you allow into your inner circle, you create space for connections that actually enhance your life rather than complicate it. And this selectivity leads to something Jung considered the ultimate achievement of later life. The great gift of reaching 60 isn't just accumulated wisdom or senior citizen discounts, it's the freedom that comes from finally understanding that you don't owe your life to anyone else's expectations, including your family's. This liberation often begins with disappointment, like a phoenix rising from the ashes of broken expectations, but it evolves into something far more valuable, the power to live authentically without apologizing for who you've become. When you stop trying to be the person your family needs you to be and start being the person you actually are, something magical happens. You discover reserves of energy and joy you didn't know existed. This freedom manifests in countless ways that would have seemed impossible in your younger, more compliant years. Maybe you finally take that cross-country RV trip you've dreamed about, move to that beach town in North Carolina, or simply say no to family gatherings that feel more like endurance tests than celebrations. Perhaps you start dating someone your family doesn't approve of, or pursue a passion they consider frivolous, like learning to play guitar, starting a blog, or volunteering for causes that matter to you. The beautiful thing about this stage of life is that you've earned the right to be selective. The transformation from family disappointment to personal liberation isn't always smooth. It can feel like learning to walk again after years of crawling to meet everyone else's expectations. You might lose some relationships that were built on your compliance rather than genuine connection, like discovering that some friendships were really just business arrangements. But you'll gain something far more valuable, a deep sense of self-respect and authenticity that can't be taken away by anyone else's behavior, attitudes, or approval. This inner freedom becomes your greatest asset in navigating whatever challenges your later years might bring. Perhaps the most profound aspect of this liberation is how it changes your relationship with time itself, that most precious American commodity. Instead of spending precious years trying to fix broken family dynamics or earning love that should be freely given, you invest your energy in experiences and relationships that actually nourish your soul. You realize that disappointment was just the doorway to something much better, a life lived on your own terms, surrounded by people who genuinely appreciate the remarkable person you've become. And that, my friend, is worth celebrating regardless of who else shows up to the party. This is what Jung called the final individuation, and it's waiting for you. So here we are at the end of this journey, and I want you to take a moment to really absorb what we've explored together, from the beautiful lie of unconditional family support to the revolutionary possibility of creating your own chosen family. The disappointment you've felt with your family isn't a character flaw or a sign that you're ungrateful. It's actually a profound awakening to the reality of human relationships and your own psychological maturity. Carl Jung would say you're right on schedule for what he called the final individuation, that crucial psychological transformation that can only happen after you've accumulated enough life experience to see through society's myths. But here's what I need you to understand, whether you're a retired teacher in Ohio, a grandmother in Texas, or a divorced executive in California. Knowledge without action is just interesting conversation over coffee. Everything we've discussed today means nothing unless you're willing to make some hard decisions about how you're going to live the rest of your life. Are you going to keep pouring your emotional energy into relationships that drain you like an old car battery, or are you finally ready to invest in your own psychological freedom? Are you going to continue playing roles that no longer serve you, or will you have the courage to disappoint people in service of your authentic self? I want you to ask yourself these questions honestly, right now. When was the last time you felt genuinely appreciated by your family for who you are, not just what you do for them? When did you last make a decision based purely on your own desires rather than family expectations or guilt? If those questions make you uncomfortable, good. That discomfort is pointing you toward the work you need to do, like a compass pointing toward your true north. Now, if this video has opened your eyes to some uncomfortable truths about family dynamics and aging, I need you to do something important right now. Smash that like button, not just because it helps the algorithm, but because it's your first act of choosing yourself over what others might think. It's a small but powerful statement that you're ready to prioritize your own psychological well-being over keeping the peace. And here's the thing. When you hit subscribe and turn on those notifications, you're not just following a channel, you're joining a community of people who understand that real wisdom sometimes comes with the price of disappointing those who prefer you small, manageable, and predictable. Your transformation doesn't end here. It starts here, right in this moment of recognition. The insights you've gained today are only valuable if you apply them to your actual life, starting with small acts of self-advocacy. Maybe it's saying no to the next family obligation that feels more like a burden than a joy. Perhaps it's finally pursuing that interest you've been postponing because it doesn't fit your family's image of who you should be. Or it could be as simple as spending a quiet Sunday morning reading a book instead of making obligatory family phone calls. And listen, I know this isn't easy content to digest. These aren't feel-good platitudes you'd find on a motivational poster. These are profound psychological truths that can fundamentally change how you navigate your relationships and view your own worth. That's exactly why we need more conversations like this. More honest discussions about the realities of aging and family dynamics that nobody else wants to address. If you found value in today's video, share it with someone who might need to hear these truths. Your courage to engage with difficult topics might be exactly what another person needs to break free from their own emotional prison. Remember, the goal isn't to become bitter or resentful toward your family. It's to become so psychologically whole and self-sufficient that their limitations no longer define your happiness or steal your peace. When you achieve that kind of inner freedom, you might find that some family relationships actually improve because you're no longer desperately needing them to be something they can't be. And if they don't improve, well, then you'll have the wisdom and strength to build a life so fulfilling that their absence becomes irrelevant rather than devastating. The question now is, what are you going to do with this awakening? Your future self is counting on your answer.